And then I know that you had an encounter with God.
Yes.
Like, you could imagine that this was not enough. Then you also met
Right.
God. So, what is God to you, and what happened?
Yeah. And this is so beautiful for me, maybe for obvious reasons, but also because there's actually a progression here too. And it's really fascinating for me. And it helps me also to explain some of the stuff we were just talking about who goes where and why and when, and right, who's making the rules and who's the gatekeepers, if any. And these experiences help me because I've met God now 3 times. And the first time I was still in a lot of darkness myself. I always talk about this, but it's like I always had the light within me, and I a desperately loving person. Like I want everyone to be happy, and that's always been my truth. And I also fell into a lot of self abuse, and in that trauma that I experienced as a child, I went into some dark places. So when I talk about that darkness, that's kind of confusion and anger and these types of things that I had to heal. And this first experience I had, I wasn't too far kind of out of all. I was still just right on the edges of all that darkness, like just starting to maybe sort of come back to my real self and my real purpose here on earth, right? And so things were starting to clarify a little bit, and I had this experience. And again, at this point, it's not quite out of body feeling to me, but it's a very, very clear and lucid experience in a dream, a mystical dream state, which is part of what, again, is a theme in my life and what I love to share with people. And in this experience, I was in a big field. It was bright. It was beautiful. It was kind of pleasant and simple, and just little flowers and some trees on the edge of the field. And I saw up in the corner there was someone at a table. And I was like, oh, who's that? I'll go check that out. And so I started walking up the field. And as they were getting closer and closer, I noticed this table they were at was huge, huge table. And then I realized it's just covered in like food of all kinds, so much food. There's just one person there. And I realized it's this large African-American man with a Hawaiian shirt and just very, very big. And he's just laughing and laughing like the most, it reminds me of like Santa Claus or something, like just this like happy, joyful, like big laughs. And I started laughing, when someone's laughing, you kind of just laugh. Like someone's crying, you feel sad. So I started laughing, and I was like, what are we laughing about? And he's just laughing and laughing. So I was like, why do you have all this food? And he was like, well, I have everything. I have everything. It's not just food. I have anything. And I was like, why do you have anything and everything? How? And he was like, I'm God. And I was like, you're God? And he's like, yeah. And I just felt so happy. I felt that joy of that laughter. I felt that there's anything available to me and to anyone, that there's just abundance and that it's infinite. And then the experience was over. And I woke up and I was like, wow, I guess God is a giant African-American man in a field. I mean, like it was confusing again to me. And I was like, well, what does this mean? And I was like, I don't know what it means, but I experienced abundant feeling. I experienced this joyful feeling, and it was really reassuring to me at the time as well. Somehow I just felt like there's something that you have in these experiences where it's just beyond what you could describe. It's beyond what someone could tell you. It's beyond what you could read. You just now know it. I know this feeling. I know that there's an abundance. I know that there's a joyful mirth in all things, just from this one little conversation with God. And I even at the time was like, I mean, that's not really God though, right? Like that's not really God. And it was many years later, I was even more healed. I had come back to myself even more deeply. I was living even more deeply in my purpose. And I again had another experience. And this time I did go out of body. I instantly was just immersed in the light. This was my first full white light experience. So I'd seen the white light at the window, but I hadn't gotten into it. And in this, I went into the white light. And it was even better than the dark light. The dark light was just release. I had nothing to do. Again, it was just pure relief. But this white light was like healing, nourishing, right? It was like pouring into your body everything you could ever need. And it was very fulfilling. And I felt like I was surrounded by this light, and the light was God. The just pure golden light was God. And it was holding me like a baby. And I loved it. I was just like, yes, let's just do this forever, please. Again, very nourishing, very nurturing. And I thought to myself, well, this is God. And so I kind of like pushed it into an image. And it's pretty funny, but it was almost like Gandalf. It was very wizard-like. Like it was old man beard. It was sort of the almost traditional Western like vision of God. And but it wasn't that, right? It actually was just the light, but I sort of like made it into a sort of being so that I could interact with it more easily. God. And God was answering all of these questions. And it's so ironic because I only remember the last 3 or 4 questions I asked. And by that point, they were so almost pointless. I know I had asked much better questions, but that was not the level of consciousness I got to bring back with me when I came back to my body for whatever reason. But some of the questions I asked, I was like, oh, what about art? Are you all art? And he was like, of course I am. Of course, all art is God. It's expression of love, of creativity. It's art. It's me. Yes, that's me. I was like, even Michelangelo? Like, why wouldn't it be? But again, I was just like a little child being held. I think I was just so excited and I was just asking all of these questions. He was like, yes, Michelangelo too. And I was like, oh, are you also coming through dogs and animals? Because I had this old debate with some Christians who thought that no animals had souls. And I was always like, oh, it's so obvious that animals have souls. Of course they have souls. So now I had God on the line, right? So I was going to ask, what about dogs? What about animals? And he's like, yes, of course. All living things are me. I am all of them. And I was like, that is so cool. And then I got kind of serious and I thought, well, if you're dogs too, then that means you were my dog. When I was young, I had this dog that was my best friend, my soulmate, deeply connected to this dog. And I said, could you bring my dog back to me? Can I see him again? And God kind of got a little serious. And I just felt like there was something in him that was like, sure, but that's not actually the best choice for either of you. It's not horrible, right? Or he would have said no, maybe, but there was just something in it that's like, be careful what you wish for. And he said, of course. And then the experience ended and I came back to my body. I woke up in my bed and I thought, whoa, I just talked to God. And he told me the most exciting part for me, he told me I could see my dog again. I could see Ranger again. And I was so excited. I was like, how is he going to make good on this promise? And I heard it from the living room, a sound. And I was like, what is that? I was like, it's Ranger. And I jumped out of my bed. I ran into the living room and there was Ranger, my dog, in my living room. And I fell apart. I just like crumpled on top. I was crying. I love him so much. It was so good to see him. But as I was hugging him, I realized how old he felt and how fragile and how hard I think it was for him to have appeared like this. And something in me then felt a little bit bad for asking for him. And then I remembered that sort of feeling that God was like, okay, but here's what you've asked for. And I just look back on it. And even though it was incredible and beautiful and heart-wrenching and intense, I wonder what it cost Ranger as a soul to hold on that long, to be able to come back to me at that point. You know, and I just also have understood the value in allowing things that are dead to die, including people that we love and beings that we love. And so there was just something in that of a lesson of, yes, it was great for me and awesome. It's not quite the natural order of things and it might not be the best for everybody. So it was a confusing moment as well. And this was all just brutally real. And then I woke up in my bed and I realized that the previous time I had woke up had not been real, even though it was very real to me, felt real. I touched his fur. I cried on his fur. Like I smelled him. It was very real. But that was also just an out-of-body experience. And now I was really awake, which was also exceptionally disorienting. And then my whole next 2 days, like I was not capable of interacting with reality very well because it was disorienting. It was confusing. It was intensely emotional. It was very purifying. It was very intense. And people who have had really intense spiritual experiences, I think, can relate. Sometimes it's really, really difficult to just go on with mundane life, even though miracles have occurred that no one's going to really be able to accept or, hold with you. They're kind of lonely. So that was the second time I got to meet God. The third time I met God, I actually was on a spiritual journey, and so I had the assistance of some earth medicine, and which I don't normally use, even though I do shamanic healing and shamanic practice and practitioners. All of the things I do, I don't really necessarily use those things, although I'm not for or against. It's just not my way, right? But I had been very specifically called by my guides and my allies to sit in ceremony with this medicine, and so I did, because I've learned to listen and do what I'm told, as I say. And so I followed my heart and my soul's guidance to this experience. And in this experience, I also went all kinds of places. It would be impossible for me to tell the whole story today, here and now. But the part that we're interested in, I met God. And when I met God this time, it was very different because it was very much in 3D reality. There was no out of body sort of aspect otherwise. I was here, and now I was looking through my physical eyes and hearing through my physical ears, and I was outside, which was beautiful. So there was pine trees, and there was birds, and there was the sun and the clouds, and bugs and butterflies, and everything was there with me. I was in it all. And so I looked up and I saw, too perfect to even describe. It was like this tree bough was God's eye, and this cloud was God's other eye, and this tree trunk was God's nose, and here was God's mouth, was the ground, and it was looking right at me. And I said, oh, you're God. And I said, yes, you're God. And I said, oh, everything is God. And it said, yes, everything is God. And I was like, how is everything God? And it was like, everything is God. And it was like the bird would fly by right at the right moment, and the bug would fly at the right moment, and the tree would sway at the right moment to make the face of God be talking to me perfectly. I just understood exactly that every single person is like an antenna. There was a few people in my vision as well who were actually there, and I saw them unlike I ever had before. I've seen auras my whole life, right? I can feel and see energies from people, but this was something else. I saw like this electric current that was both an electric current going through them and animating them, and that was God, but also it was like fractal lines were just coming off these electric lines and spewing out into everything else, and everything else was then connected, and it was all actually just one electric stream going through all things at all times and all ways. And that was God. And I said, and I asked again, like, how is everything you? Do they know it? And it was like, they just are, whether they know it or not. And I loved it. It broke me apart, and I had such joy and gratitude to feel this presence of God within me while seeing it around me, while understanding there's nothing that could not be God. All things are God. And it was just so perfect. It was that oneness consciousness, that unity consciousness. I saw it. I felt it. I heard it. I understood it. I knew it. It was in me. It was all around me. It was outside of me. It was all things at all times. And it's indescribable, really. It's indescribable. It changed me. Things I already knew. I knew it's all one. I knew that God's in all things, but to then know it, to really feel it, to see it, to talk to it as it, to experience that level of God, that's very different from what I had before. And what's fascinating to me is I looked back at the 3 times I'd met God, and I saw that each time I met and understood and experienced exactly as much of God as I could. I received exactly as much love as I was capable of receiving in that moment, which is equal to the amount that I love myself. And that actually had been the key. There was never any restriction. It wasn't like I couldn't have known God in the way that I experienced God in the 3rd encounter from the beginning, except that I wouldn't have been able to receive it, right? I wouldn't have been able to accept it. I wouldn't be able to understand it. And so I just couldn't. I just wasn't capable of it. Right. And so I just saw that so clearly that first time. It was just a conversation. It was just a sort of glance of the abundance and a simple view of the joy. That was as much as I could take. And the second time was actually in God's embrace, and I was receiving like that much love. And then the third time, everything I have ever been and ever was God.
To watch the full video, click the link below, and I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel.